So let's add a little bit more detail to the plastic story. As we said, global warming is one problem, but plastic pollution is another very serious problem, obviously created by humans as well. So this source, Our World in Data, is a fantastic source for these sorts of podcasts, and they are not always the latest because it takes a lot of effort to pull the data together. So these are the pathways by which plastic enters the world's ocean, estimates of global plastics entering the ocean from land-based sources in 2010 based on the pathway from primary production through to marine plastic inputs. So even though the data is 10 years old, 10, 12 years old, you know that the story has not gotten any better, maybe even gotten worse, even though awareness definitely has gone up. And there are many efforts to clean up plastic in the ocean. And just this week, some nice report came out on how one of the contraptions swept up some 20 million tons or some serious amount of plastic waste in the ocean. So global primary plastic production 270 million tons per year. So it's going from the production to the usage sites. Global plastic waste 275 million tons per year. So it can exceed primary production in a given year since it can incorporate production from the previous years. So leftover stuff from the previous year adds up to each year. So we are doing this now year after year. Coastal plastic waste 99.5 million tons per year. This is the total plastic waste generated by all populations within 50 kilometers of a coastline, therefore at risk of entering the ocean. And the projections are that this coastal population is going to keep increasing in the coming years and decades. So here is 2 billion people living within 50 kilometers of the coastline, which is going to continue to increase. Mismanaged coastal plastic waste 31.5 million tons per year. I'm not going to read all these details here. Plastic inputs to the oceans 8 million tons per year. Okay, plastic in surface waters 10,000s to 100,000s of tons. So there is a wide range of estimates because this is not so easy to estimate, and people use satellites, etc., but some of the microplastic is transparent and cannot be detected even if you used drones. Okay, so this is another big problem in estimating the amount of plastic in the ocean at the surface or at different depths and at the bottom. Okay. So here is the history of global plastics production. Annual global polymer resin and fiber production measured in metric tons per year. So it's going here from 50 million tons to 350 million tons. There have been dips. You can see the financial crisis of 2008 showing up here. And when this data gets extended, I'm sure you will see a big bump during the pandemic years, because a lot of the work from home and deliveries and various safety concerns during COVID ended up increasing plastic use, and temporarily at least we completely forgot about worrying about plastic, right? So global plastic waste by disposal 1980 to 2015. Discarded is a massive fraction of it, even though it has dropped, but maybe not fast enough. Incinerated can be very polluting in terms of particulate matter and toxic chemicals and general pollution. And recycle. So recycled also is growing, but so is incarcerated, which is not incinerated. Sorry, did I say incarcerated? Incinerated. So we have to worry about the environmental impacts of these as well. Share of plastic waste that is inadequately managed in 2010. Inadequately disposed waste is not formally managed and includes disposals in dumps or open, uncontrolled landfills where it's not fully contained, so the pollution into the water, land, and flow off into the rivers and oceans. Inadequately managed waste has high risk of polluting rivers and oceans. So the rich countries are doing much better in terms of the share of containing the share of plastic that is inadequately managed, but The poorer countries, especially in this region here and in this region here, have very high percentage of plastic that is inadequately managed, which is not good news, right? Share of global mismanaged waste in 2010. So this is mismanaged share of plastic waste that is inadequately managed, and this is share of global mismanaged waste. Again, global share of mismanaged plastic waste derived from a given country. Mismanaged waste is the sum of littered or inadequately disposed waste. As we saw, inadequately disposed waste is not formally managed, as we said before, where it is not fully contained. This is key. Mismanaged waste could eventually enter the ocean via inland waterways, wastewater flow outflows, and transport by wind or tides. Okay, so tides keep coming up the coast, going back out, and people go on the beach and litter and leave a lot of the plastic as well. So you can see that here China shows up as having a huge share of mismanaged waste plastic, and the other countries here are also significant contributors. Of course, population matters and other waste handling systems, recycling, etc. matter. So plastic ocean input from top 20 rivers in 2015. Plastic input to the ocean from top 20 polluting rivers across the world. Shown is the given river, its location, and estimated annual input of plastic to the ocean in tons. Yangtze tops the list, which corresponds to what we are seeing here. Then comes Ganga or Ganges in India, 333,000 tons, 115,000 tons. China has many rivers, and then come Indonesia and other countries. Surprisingly, India has only one river, but nonetheless, this story and the numbers here are consistent in terms of mismanaged plastic waste. Global river plastic input to the ocean by region. So obviously Asia is a majority of it, 86%. So just look at this map here. This is not good news, right? So hopefully these countries can get together and make plans, because many of the rivers are shared by Himalayan-born rivers flowing across many countries. Africa, South America, Central and North America, Europe is doing well. Asia, Australia and Pacific are doing well, but the populations are smaller as well. Okay. Surface plastic mass by the ocean basin in 2013. Global ocean total was 268,950 tons, but remember this number is highly uncertain, and this is only plastics within the surface waters and not at depth or on the seafloor. North Pacific has a lot of it, the Great Garbage Patch and so on that you keep hearing about. Indian Ocean collects a lot, North Atlantic and Mediterranean, South Pacific and South Atlantic. Obviously the Southern Hemisphere has far fewer people and much less land, so less flowing into the oceans. Okay. Where does plastic accumulate in the ocean? Microplastics are greater than 0.5 centimeter in diameter, so easily consumed by many species. Macroplastics are greater than 0.5 centimeter in diameter. Macroplastics. Microplastics are smaller than 0.5 centimeter in diameter. Okay. So accumulated plastic by age in tons. Accumulated plastic here in these three categories: shoreline, coastline, and coastal and offshore reservoirs of plastic accumulation. So you can see that 1950s to the 2010s, the macro and microplastics have both increased, but here macroplastics have dropped off. Microplastics have also dropped off more recently. 2/3 of the buoyant macroplastic released into the marine environment since 1950 is stored close to the ocean's shorelines. you have to, of course, look at all of them together to understand how the distribution is being changed over time, or changing over time. A large part of the missing plastic problem is explained by plastic accumulation, burial, and resurfacing along shorelines. The ocean tends to throw everything back unless it's something very heavy and sinks to the bottom. But obviously that's not the case for plastic, even though there is accumulation offshore as well. So coastal total from 1950 to 2015, like as here, 150,000 tons of macroplastic and 80,000 tons of microplastic. And here you can see again the trend of increase in macroplastic is very obvious, with a huge jump here. Reasons need to be understood. Most macroplastic, 79% in the coastal environment, is less than 5 years old. So that means accumulation has exponentially increased recently. Deep waters greater than 200 meters are called offshore. So in the offshore environments, so here you have a lot, 1 million tons of macroplastic, 500,000 tons of microplastic, remembering that these could be very severe underestimates. Obviously the number I mentioned before, 20 million tons of plastic being swept up, is probably wrong. You can look it up. In offshore environments, older macroplastics have had longer to accumulate over time. Plastics younger than 5 years account for only 26%. Macroplastics older than 15 years old account for nearly half, so they don't biodegrade and they keep accumulating. Most microplastic, 74%, is from the 1990s and earlier, suggesting longer breakdown timescales. Okay, so just to get a sense that plastic is everywhere now, you can go to a village in India and dig 20 feet deep on land and you can see plastic that has somehow made it down. So during the rain, obviously soil is turned over and then plastic gets under, and then more mud flows over it and so on. Is that hydrocarbon that's being stored away? Well, if we keep increasing it, obviously that's not very good for the environment, for soil productivity, soil carbon, and so on. And there are, of course, microbes being invented to digest plastic, which obviously will become more and more common because the oil spills, for example, are now being treated with microbes that can eat oil. Hydrocarbons. Those are hydrocarbons. They're food for somebody. It's just a matter of how long it takes for them to degrade. Plastic accumulates because it doesn't biodegrade very fast, and the bad news is that even the so-called bioplastics made from cornstarch and other things don't biodegrade because people are not aware that there is a chemical that is coated on top of the biodegradable plastic, and that chemical makes it biodegrade very slowly or not biodegrade. So we are not being told everything when we buy something. So it's often referred to as the carbon fractal, where the system is set up in a way that pretty much everything we do accumulates carbon. So the way to think about the whole thing has to change. Systemic changes have to be made to reduce plastic pollution. Okay?